I realized that I didn't say what I wanted to say in response to Helen's reply in the second form, especially where Helen, I think I just wanted to say how important the concern is in the way that we use the language of slavery that I think you pointed to, because, depending on our social location, it's really easy for us to cheapen language that expresses a lot of pain and trauma by the way we spiritualize it or use it as a metaphor, this kind of thing. So due caution, I think, is called for there. And you rightly, I think, point to how Bryant shows that Paul, as no stranger to the condition of oppression himself, is kind of repurposing the language of slavery in a way that may have indeed empowered slaves and required people who were not slaves to, you might say, embrace a kind of shared condition with those who were enslaved in their community, and to see slavery not as simply a limit on their freedom, but a mode of their resistance, a mode of being weapons for justice. So I think that is a good thing for us to underscore here. And I guess the other thing I'd want to add, maybe more than Bryant does, is for that to be a sound use of slavery, the language of slavery. I think that there have to be concrete communal conditions in which slavery as freedom is being experienced in the flesh. So it can't just be this kind of spiritualizing of something that's not really happening and effectively reinforces the condition, the oppressed condition of slaves. Instead, it's got to be happening in a context where sharing in the condition of enslavement is actually bringing freedom to slaves materially, concretely in the distribution of power. And you can see how this is, I think, happening in contexts like the Roman communities, and even more clearly, perhaps, in the Corinthian church that Paul writes to, where it is quite clear that this is true in Philemon. Slaves and masters in the community, slaves and non-slaves, are gathered to the same table. They dip from the same bowl. They break bread from the same loaf. And this is a performance of liberation for slaves because of the concrete ways in which they're able to share life, share space, share table, share resources with people who are not slaves, and are therefore invited to undermine the dichotomy between freedom and slavery by the way that they share their lives and mingle them with one another. Of course, that's got to extend beyond just a ritual meal in the church, but I think you can see how in a Roman context, you can see this in the context of the civil rights movement in the South in the US as well. Simply cases of people that the powers that be meant to keep segregated, simply encouraging people like that to mingle their lives with one another, is experienced as a threat to the established order by those powers that be. And so it is really meaningful for masters and slaves to eat from the same bowl, sit at the same table, as Paul's teaching implies. Even as I'd say we need for that real change that's happening in the meal to extend and to continue to disturb and reconfigure structures of relationship and power well beyond that meal. And I think that's in fact the purpose of the Eucharistic meal in Paul's teaching. And we're going to see this kind of negotiation of power differences in the end of Romans, and the presentation of that as something that is a sort of schooling for all of life, as opposed to being an exceptional place where, slaves get to not be slaves for a few minutes, but then they have to go back to being slaves as soon as they leave the table. Like, we don't want that. So anyway, just a few words there, Helen, in response to your great reaction to the Bryant article. Thanks again.